Welcome to episode 318 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good afternoon, evening, or morning, as the case may be, Mr. Bell. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I see you're at your secret Southern Command location today.
I am. I'm, in a different part of the facility.
Sublevel 47, I believe.
Correct. That's right.
If I'm guessing correctly.
It's a while to get down here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it, but it's secure and
what it's all about.
It'll be good. So, well, good. I'm glad that you're enjoying your nice beachfront compound today.
Thank you. And just a quick thank you to our Patreon sponsors. Definitely appreciate you. And if you do want to become a Patreon sponsor, and with all of the luxurious benefits that affords you, you can do so at patreon.com/defensivesec. And we also have a link to that on our website, and I'll have it in the show notes as well. So thank you very much. And by the way, we also have another sponsor from the Funk Defender line. So
nice.
It was supposed to get into last week's episode. However, the production crew, who by the way has been since fired, actually dropped the ball and did not put it in. So now we're gonna play that and extend our deepest apologies.
This episode is sponsored by Funk Defender Underwear, the ultra-breathable anti-judgment underwear made for people who live on con floors, code at 3 a.m., and consider Febreze a hygiene product. You deserve underwear that works as hard as you do, or, sits with you through a 6-hour CTF surrounded by hot plastic, stale air, and the haunting aroma of con badge lanyards. That's why Funk Defender uses our proprietary Hack Weave, anti-stank mesh, engineered to wick away shame, Red Bull spills, and trace amounts of ramen broth. Built with comfort in mind, Funk Defender undies feature elastic waistbands that won't roll down no matter how many badges you clip on, tagless design so there's nothing to itch, or reverse engineering hotel room routers, and antimicrobial fabric that lasts at least 3 DEF CONs, even if you don't. For a limited time, use promo code BadgeLife and get 15% off your first pair, plus a free Funk Defender Faraday pouch for when your boxers just need a little more privacy. You might not shower, you might not sleep 2 hours a night, you might still be wearing a lanyard from 2018, but your underwear, it should still respect you. Funk Defender. Boxers built for Black Hat, DEF CON, and beyond. Because hygiene is optional, but comfort is root.
There you go. Which, it's timely. Well, maybe it's a little behind the times, I guess, because of DEF CON. But, it's really intended for that kind of audience where, you go the whole week without sleeping or showering.
It's really for everybody else's, sense of...
It's true. Like dying, being stupid, and going to a con for too long. It's only a problem for other people.
Good. So we'll work on getting a better production crew. I think we're just not picking the right slaves, and you figure people used to mine for blood diamonds would be good at this. But no, we'll work.
I don't know. Oh well.
Anyway.
So, I should have said this already, that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. And by the way, I still am looking for an employer. So if you're in the market for somebody with a dull, dry wit, who's been around computers for a while, I'm available. There you go.
Excellent summation of all of your skills, sir.
Totally. it's that under promise over deliver right there. All right, so getting into our stories for today, we have one from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is "New Downgrade Attack Can Bypass FIDO Auth in Microsoft Entra ID." I'm
going to just say right up front, they buried the lead in like the second to the last paragraph, but please.
Yeah, there was a there was a I think we'll jump to that point right now, but there was a prior disclosure about auth bypasses in Entra ID, which was developed by some security researchers using a fairly clever technique of creating a QR code that a victim would have to scan, and that would enable the attacker to effectively capture the auth credentials. But the problem was, in that instance, while it would work in a lab setting, it actually doesn't work in practicality because there's a pretty significant, presumably a significant geographic discrepancy between where the user is trying to sign in from and where the attacker is located. So that was a problem that kind of rendered that whole process ineffective. So a lot of the prior news about this attack technique is not terribly accurate, I guess. There was a lot of hoopla about it at the time, but in this instance, there actually is something that is workable here under certain circumstances. And I'll simplify it to a fault and say this is, using much the same plumbing that we've talked about in the past, where an adversary is using a proxy to trick somebody to initiate an authentication session through this attacker-controlled proxy. And that typically is rendered, useless in the instances where you're using a passkey or FIDO authentication, because the endpoint is signed as part of the authentication key. And what the researchers here, and this was Proofpoint that came up with it, and they've, by the way, not seen this in the wild, but I do want to come back to why I thought this was important to talk about. What they found was that they could they could cause their proxy to spoof being a browser that does not support FIDO authentication. So in this instance, they're talking about that they're masquerading as Safari for Windows, which has not been updated in many years and doesn't support a FIDO authentication or passkeys or anything like that. And so that, without additional, security settings and being locked down, will downgrade the authentication type and require a more traditional multi-factor, standard username, password, multi-factor token, or SMS, which the attacker can then use that proxy to capture the authentication token, usually in the form of a cookie, and then masquerade as the user successfully. And so that, is conceptually fairly, I think, hopefully fairly simple to understand. And as they point out in the article here, you really need to make sure that you're, to the extent you're able to, not permit authentication downgrades. And I think that's really important because when you look at the recent news, there's been a lot of attacks on passkeys and FIDO, but all of those attacks have been basically trying to work around it. Like, it's not a head-on attack. The adversaries here, or security researchers, as the case might be, are trying to find ways to circumvent that authentication by downgrading or what have you. So, I think it's important to understand that this isn't a problem necessarily with FIDO or passkeys by itself. It's highlighting that the attackers are really, I think, going to continue focusing on innovative and novel ways to trick you into authenticating through some other less secure means.
Yeah, I think you covered it well. A couple of things that stood out to me is, in many cases, you've got a default configuration that's trying to be helpful by offering you to have a automatic fallback to that lesser secure authentication method. So, equated to like in the days of when we rolled out HTTPS 1.2, or TLS 1.2, I should say, for an HTTPS session. A lot of browsers or a lot of web servers, if a browser came in, it would ask them, hey, what can you support? And try to support the most secure thing. But you could configure it to fall back to TLS 1.1 or 1.0 or SSL. And you have to know to go turn that off because it's a convenience factor. It's a automation factor to allow interoperability. But if you and the controls are there, this is not necessarily a problem with this tooling. Like Entra ID is not broken. It has a functionality that is being offered to allow it to fall back to a less secure methodology to allow more clients to authenticate. So, but you can turn that off. You just have to know to turn that off. You have to know that this attack exists. Now, that does mean that if you have a client that can't support FIDO, you're going to block them. And that is probably the risk, right? That's the scary part that these people have is they don't want to break clients. So they've got to look at the logs and make sure everybody can support FIDO or whatever it is that, the most advanced authentication mechanism. But again, to your point, they're not the bad actors or like you said, the researchers in this case are not necessarily going after the core protocol. They're going after weaknesses around it. Kind of like most encryption attacks aren't going after the core encryption protocol or algorithm. They're going after implementation or methodologies around it to break it. So I think this is one of those that this is probably such a deep in the weeds setting that you really have to know what you're doing to go know the implication of that particular setting on that particular one tiny little area of one of many, many, many pieces of your technology stack, which can be hard. It can be hard to know how to do all that. So, it's an interesting example of really having the wisdom to understand what all of these settings and configurations mean and having a security mindset as an admin, right? Because if you're an admin and you're judged on, hey, uptime and usability and capability, and you see something like this that looks scary, like I might block out some of your clients, you're not going to be super comfortable turning that on.
That was a big problem with in your example of the TLS 1.2. Like that was a large, there was a lot of people having a lot of heartburn about turning off older versions of TLS.
And it wasn't just because of software updates. You had a lot of embedded devices out there that you couldn't update that were still existent in the environment. At the time, for instance, I worked at a financial institution that was doing credit card processing type work. And that was a big problem of PCI was pushing to get it up to a certain level, but you had all these machines out in the world that couldn't talk that level. And so this was this big conflict going on there. So yeah, it can be a problem. You can get creative in ways of solving it, but this is one of those things where it makes me think that you need to be doing regular audits against standards and best practices from a security perspective against these tools, because the admins who are doing 1,000 things all day are not typically super security savvy, even if they're interested and they want to do things the best way they can. This kind of is an example of something's just so down in the weeds that I wouldn't expect my average Microsoft admin to really know this well, and security's got to help them there.
Yeah, and you're not going to find this in any sort of SOC 2 or ISO or this is it's such a as you said such a down in the weeds detail, and I think to another point you made, a lot of organizations do some periodic, revalidation, but it's more in the spirit of like drift management, looking for configurations that have been changed accidentally or intentionally, and need to be brought back into compliance. But that's different than reassessing whether something that was intentionally set a certain way should still be set that way. That's a really good point. I don't know that a lot of organizations do that, intentionally at least.
It's a lot of work, especially when you're just trying to keep things running.
But we have AI now, so like, I don't know why it's so hard.
How could I forget? Just AI, go fix it.
We have all that AI stuff now. I think we should be super easy.
My bad. This is why I should be replaced by AI, because I forgot.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So our next story also comes from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is Docker Hub still hosts dozens of Linux images with the XZ backdoor. So for those of you who may have conveniently forgot, last March of 2024, I should say, there was a backdoor planted in the XZ compression library, and that is actually integral to OpenSSH. And so the implication there was that an attacker who had a certain public RSA public key would be able to execute commands on a host running SSH with a vulnerable version of this XZ library, which is really bad. And there's a whole lot of drama around, how it happened and whatnot. And we covered that in a prior episode a long time ago. But the news here is that there's a security firm here who's started looking at what appears to be a small subset of images on Docker Hub, and found that at least 35, and they're supposing it's a much larger number because they didn't actually look at everything, still has that old vulnerable version of XZ. And I guess most of them are associated with Debian, the Linux distribution. And Debian, for their part, says that they've left them up intentionally because they're basically as historical artifacts, and they say that no one should actually be using them, though they are there for use. And that is, that's I think the security company, Binarly, I think is the name of that security company, is basically saying it's kind of a cop out. And given the fact that it's there, and different companies or organizations may have one or more of those images built into their pipelines, they could just be pulling it automatically, or there could be other images that are built on top of those images. And this could just be continue to exist. In this particular instance, though, I think there are some. It's probably not the most urgent thing. It is probably not common for it to be still included as a used image. However, it's also not common for a Docker image to expose SSH to the internet. That's not you have to kind of go through some extra hoops to make that happen. So, but what I wanted to talk about was the larger problem here, and that is, I run a whole bunch of services, under the infosec.exchange banner, and a bunch of them run on containers, and so I've got some production like experience from a consumer perspective, and it is a big problem to see containers that have just out of date componentry in them. I mean, this is even beyond how I liken containers that are posted to these public repositories is kind of like picking up a USB drive and you found in the parking lot, plugging it into your production server. Even that aside, we're pinning a lot of responsibility on the maintainers of these images to periodically update them. And what I have observed is that, especially in the open source world, a lot of these image updates are tied to updates to the application. And so some of these applications aren't updated all that often. And so the underlying underlying componentry. Now I know that containers rely a lot on the host operating system, but a lot of the componentry is specific to that container, and that doesn't get updated until the application goes through a version update. And so you could end up very conceivably with some fairly significant vulnerabilities in your running image because the maintainer of whatever software you're using hasn't published a new version yet. And that is, I feel like this is kind of a hidden, and I know that this is an obvious thing. Like I suspect a lot of people are all over this and probably throwing stuff at their phone right now. But I also think that it's not it's not necessarily something that is commonly it's not part of a common control set that a lot of organizations have. You don't necessarily have source code or SCA capabilities wrapped around images that you're downloading off of Docker Hub. It's just I guess what I'm trying to say is the kinds of organizations that are downloading and using images off of Docker Hub probably are less secure or less sophisticated. I should say, not less secure, less sophisticated than the companies that are that do have those source code composition analysis tools and the really mature build pipelines and whatnot that can identify that some image they have has a vulnerability. And so I feel like this is a ticking time bomb that hasn't really gone off yet for the industry.
Yeah, I think you covered everything I had in my notes, actually. The one thing that I'll point out is typically when you've got these components inside a container, it's not, as they might say, field serviceable. The user is usually not supposed to or able to even update those point components or dependencies. So you are very reliant on that third party to do it. So it's not something you could just go patch on your own. And it is an interesting problem. I don't know how often it's truly bit somebody, but it certainly could.
Yeah, I can't think of any instances that it has. The best practice, and I think at this point, a lot of organizations have kind of implemented the best practice where you don't let your containers run for very long. Like you're constantly downloading the latest version and recycling them, which is good. That can solve a lot of problems. But if the maintainer of those images isn't acting responsibly, A, you might not know about it, and B, it's not it's actually not necessarily fixing all the vulnerabilities that are there, and not all those vulnerabilities are going to be easily scannable depending on the set of tooling that you use. And I also say, by the way, this is something that I ran into. And I don't want to throw Red Hat under the bus, but I'm going to throw Red Hat under the bus. A lot of organizations use Red Hat, and I don't think this is exclusively a Red Hat issue. So, but a lot of organizations use Red Hat because of long-term stability. Like you pick a version, and that version is in support for an extended period of time, and it's really ideal for operations teams and for development teams and whatnot, because you don't have to worry so much about things kind of being ripped out and having to continually rewrite and accommodate major version changes and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of componentry, especially in the pre-built images container images that Red Hat puts out. There's a lot of componentry that doesn't necessarily get updated, especially in kind of the later years of support. And my observation is that a lot of I think Red Hat uses this like this is a customer responsibility, and that is not an unreasonable position to take. But you as a consumer of that have to have an understanding about what they are and are not fixing during the life cycle of these images. And so even in instances where the images are under active support by professionals, it's not necessarily always being maintained in a way, at least that I would have expected.
Sure. Yeah, and as you're talking to it also occurred to me, if you've got certain policies about not deploying certain vulnerabilities in prod, I mean, again, you don't have control over this. And, you could look at a different potential container package. You could look at, but again, that's a lot of work and a lot of disruption. But you're right. Yeah, you're once again trusting a third party with some of this stuff that I think a lot of our compliance regime assumes we have complete control over, and we don't.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. The next story comes from Dark Rating, and the title here is Charon Ransomware Emerges with APT-Style Tactics. There's a whole lot of gorpy details about how this particular ransomware works. It's pretty interesting. It abuses the Edge browser to load a malicious DLL, and that DLL decrypts what looks like a log file, but it's actually contains encrypted shell, actually twice encrypted shellcode. And the net point of this, and what I thought we could spend some time talking about, is something we've talked about for quite some time, which is the tactics that these advanced adversaries develop don't stay in the domain of those advanced adversaries for very long. Like the kind of garden variety threat actors who are trying to get their ransomware pushed out are paying attention, right? And they're seeing what works. And so in this instance, the adversary here is taking actions that you would see associated with an APT group who wants to stay under the wire, who wants to stay or under the radar. They don't want to be detected, but they're using that technique to deploy ransomware, which by definition is going to be detected. It's just that they're doing it so that their deployment of the ransomware, I assume, has a maximum probability of being successful. And so this is and we're here. I'm very concerned about this.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, I think, as these more commodity level threat actors start to adopt some of these more advanced techniques. That's more likely to get them on the radar of various defensive tooling, EDR, XDR, whatever it may be, or your new fancy AI defense tooling. So the more a technique gets used, in my mind, the more likely typically it will be that we will have a pattern that we can spot, that we can build into our defensive tools. So like anything, it's like it becomes an arms race again. If they're burning an interesting tactic in a more large scale attack type, as opposed to very focused APT type attack where they're hesitant to burn 0 days, at least in the past, maybe not so much anymore. It's more likely that the main CrowdStrikes of the world are going to spot these and defend against it. One would hope. But you're right. I mean, it's a constant evolving target that is moving all the time, and you've got some whole bell curve probably of sophistication and capability amongst threat actors, just like you do amongst defenders. And inevitably, tactics that work at the high end are going to get trickled down to less sophisticated actors. I think that's just the ecosystem. And as it becomes more mature and more commoditized and more easy to execute, you're going to see these, what used to be the realm of very sophisticated actors, become commonplace. And I think it's kind of always been that cycle. And then the most advanced threat actors will have to continue to evolve to find new and interesting ways to gain and retain access when their earlier techniques no longer work. Then again, people don't patch 10-year-old vulnerabilities, so they only need to be as good as they need to be.
It's for sure. This particular tactic, I think, is designed to help dodge some kind of cursory precautions like EDR. They're specifically taking steps that would normally not be detected by what I'll call a lazy implementation of EDR. And you raised a really good point. That kind of like EDR writ large has driven organizations to up their security programs, because like you just can't hide anymore. Like you just have to. It's coming in whether you're like it or not. It's not based on who you are. It's just it's the fact that you're there is what makes you a target. This is I think also going to cause organizations to have to implement precautions against some of these more sophisticated tactics that they aren't used to having to worry about. Like, if you're a greeting card company, you probably haven't had to worry about an APT actor. But now, if ransomware actors are starting to do this, then you probably do. So they do give a couple of recommendations, and that is limiting which binaries can load DLLs. Make sure that you're hardened against DLL sideloading. You want to make sure that whatever tooling you have is tuned so that it's looking for non-standard execution flows. So things like that are launching SVC host processes and that sort of thing. The challenge there is that, like so many other things, that requires, I think, a level of sophistication that is not necessarily within the grasp of a lot of organizations. And some of this, by the way, especially like limiting which applications can load DLLs, for any organization that has, like bespoke business applications, like this is going to drive you absolutely batty.
Yeah, it's not a one-time thing either. You've got to constantly maintain that list.
Right.
It's going to change on a regular basis.
Kind of like an application control, where you the technology is there, but it's exceptionally hard to manage in a scalable way without lots of resources that we can't afford.
Yeah, in the real world, the way this would go is you get it all nice and set up, and then some update happens or some business team adds a new piece of software that suddenly breaks because of your security controls, and they start yelling and screaming at IT, and that happens 2 or 3 times, and suddenly this nice, handy defensive technique is disabled.
Yep. Story's old as time.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I can hope for is that there's a market reality here too of the EDR and XDR players of, hey, if this becomes widespread enough and a number of their customers get hit by this, they're going to be forced to adapt to. They're going to be forced to add custom detection rules.
Yes.
And spot this sort of technique so that they're still viable and useful to their customer base. So that is one potential outcome as well.
Yeah, that is one thing I was thinking, that the real hope here is that if you subscribe to a SentinelOne or a CrowdStrike or something like that, that they're reading these reports too and factoring this into their to their detection algorithms. But at the same time, there's only so much they can do, because they can't they can't accommodate everybody's custom built or even commercial off the shelf business software. There's just so much that's out there. I just look back to my own experience with CrowdStrike, and I think this is improving now with eBPF. But we were always in a a pickle between, do you upgrade CrowdStrike or do you upgrade your kernel? You couldn't do both. You had to, if you upgraded your kernel, then CrowdStrike, so that you were staying patched on top of things, you couldn't reliably run CrowdStrike. And I think that was not a unique CrowdStrike thing. But I had the same problem with Carbon Black's application control. You want to upgrade an application, then Carbon Black comes along and says, no, you don't. So you got to go through a process of profiling all of your applications to make sure that it's all good. Well, that's not free, right? That's so these tools have some overhead,
and you're breaking this push to try to upgrade quickly to fix a vulnerability. We want everybody to auto upgrade and upgrade their stuff, and then this becomes a detriment to that. And so you've got this trade-off you're trying to balance between what's a better security control, rapid updates or this application control. I don't know. It depends on the circumstance.
Exactly. All right. Our next story today comes from Security Week, and the title here is Vibe Coding. When everyone's the developer, who secures the code?
Not it.
The answer is no one, by the way. So it's a really
good
long
story. Moving on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
In our next story, this is a really long article. I think it's pretty thoughtfully written. At some points, I am not quite sure what the people they're quoting are thinking as they're giving their quotes. But hey, it's worth a read. Is this title would lead you to believe that the conversation here is around the current reality, and I say it that way because this is going to change over time. The current reality is that software that's created through AI by people who are not professionals, and even some who are, tends to have have some number of security vulnerabilities of varying complexity. And there's lots of things that kind of compound that a bit. They point out that increasingly there's enablement engines or enablement context code or context paragraphs, I guess. I don't want to call it code, right? To help novices vibe code better by giving them, giving the engine some additional context. Well, that itself becomes, as Casey Ellis in this article points out, that itself becomes an avenue for attackers to inject vulnerability into your code, because there's all sorts of different attack tactics going on right now where adversaries are slipping hidden text into stuff that people are copying and pasting into their AI chatbots. And so it's kind of hard to get your arms around all of the various problems with this. But one of the things that really scared the crap out of me and made me think about, well, maybe it's time to go into farming or something, was this quote, and this is a quote, right? So, will there be fewer coders in the vibe coding future? Yes and no. In one sense, everyone will become a developer, so there will be more. employees will no longer be reliant on submitting a small request to engineering, followed by an indefinite wait for a response. They'll create their own code in minutes rather than waiting for weeks. This is truly exciting element of vibe coding. Power to the people. But there will be fewer specialists or full-time professional coders working on large-scale complex apps. One person will do the work of many faster and more efficiently, and there'll be a lower emphasis on creative skills of that coder. Artistry in the coding process will become redundant. Creativity will be limited to the ideation. Now, the end quote, by the way. So I can see that future. Like, I can see that is where this is all headed. I don't think it's even that is the end game. But the place we're at today, like, it looks like a lot of this is possible. You can set your CFO down in front of Claude and have him or her write some business application through vibe coding. But the challenge is that it's kind of a bit of a facade, because they're not going to end up with something that is secure, and they're not going to know that it is insecure. And it's not covered in this article, but at the same time, like, we're also systematically cutting out the people who can help with this problem. And so I'm really concerned, about kind of the whole ecosystem that's emerging here. And by the way, like, I am optimistic that over time this problem will work itself out. Like, we will see specialist AI capabilities that are written and focused on secure software development. So you'll have a vibe coding, I think, a vibe coding outlet that will produce stuff that is, more focused on security. It'll have built into it best practices. But I also am, like, there's some practical problems. Like, the current approach to AI is based on looking at stuff that humans create, and the amount of stuff that humans create is kind of starting to be eclipsed by stuff that's that is AI generated, and stuff that's when AI reuses stuff that other AI has created, you can kind of end up in this really negative feedback loop. And from a functionality perspective, that's obviously a problem. But from a security perspective, that's where I'm concerned. Like, some of these problems are not necessarily going to be super obvious. Like, they're pretty subtle, and I'm not convinced that we're seeing enough focus from the security community around that, because I maybe just the circles that I hang out in, like, there's a whole lot of people who seem to be in complete freaking denial that this movement is happening. You read this article and they point out that, like, the people, in the future, there's going to be some much smaller number of actual software developers who are working on super sophisticated and expansive applications, but they themselves will be, AI enabled. Like, they're going to be working through AI, and everybody else is going to be more of a business type person. And it's going to be the people who make that transition into being that specialist. I think there's a parallel to security. Right? I think there's a security parallel, and I don't see a lot of people talking about that pivot and what that looks like. But at the same time, like, I also think that things are changing so fast that I wouldn't even know what guidance to give, because whatever I could come up with, or anybody could come up with, is going to be out of date like tomorrow. So sorry, I'm just having a stream of consciousness rant there.
No, it's fine. I took a little nap. It was good. I appreciate that. It's been a long day. Uh, no, I mean, you hit a lot of points I had in my notes on this article too. I think, but I think that this article does a good job of balancing. Hey, there's value here, but there's risk, but it'll get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a couple things, kind of reflecting back on what you were saying. I think that and we probably are as guilty as anyone of perpetuating this mindset of, if you're too much of a naysayer about AI in business from a security perspective, you will be sidelined. And so I think there is fear. I think there's denial, and there's also fear of like the pull from executive ranks, and the push maybe even just to embrace AI is very strong. And, I think rightly so, there's a lot of us going, well, okay, we're going with you off the cliff. Let's try to land this plane as best we can. But we're not going to stop you from going off the cliff because we like having a paycheck. So I think that's part of it. I think that the attractive value proposition of the productivity gains coming from AI coding tools is far more interesting to executives than the security risks. And that sales pitch is super compelling. And I do think that these tools are evolving very rapidly, and they're responding to intense competitive pressure. It is a land grab right now between these AI vendors. And I think there's a lot of us over in the corner from a security perspective going, have you thought about, and then they're gone, right? And they race on by. And I honestly think we're probably going to have some pretty bad instances of touching the hot stove before that's going to change. It's just, and maybe that's the way it needs to be. I mean, I remember when we started moving things to the internet for the first time, and there was a bunch of problems, and there was a bunch of, they used the term teething in this article, and that's not a bad way to put it. This is just happening so fast and so rapidly. But I think the scary part is, as much as I like the idea of democratizing and making it easier for anyone to participate at deeper levels in IT, I don't want to be a gatekeeper of that. We are moving the wisdom away from the process right now. We're evolving into an area we don't have, we're checking out the window 25 years of information security wisdom, and we're really trusting these LLMs and coding engines to know how to do that, because the individuals who are asking these questions sure don't. And they don't even know to ask. They don't know what they don't know. And these coding engines, again, we've said it on earlier shows, they have the illusion of competence. They have this amazing confidence in what they're doing, and so you trust it. It's almost a psychological game. There's unrelated to this, but it's similar, where they're finding potential psychological harm coming from these engines that are just meant to reinforce your belief system, right or wrong. So there's an illusion of wisdom. There's an illusion of overarching intelligence about these other very important areas of coding that isn't there right now. But I like to think, and I like to hope, it can be added. But I don't know that it's very high on anybody's list right now.
Yeah, I think the functionality aspect, I think, is where a lot of the focus is. Driving, you described it as a land grab, and I think that's a very apt description. So the providers right now are doing all they can to sell their value from a functionality perspective and a capability perspective, and the security will follow. But how much damage happens in the meantime is, I guess, the question. And more practically, like, what can we do from a pragmatic perspective to mitigate as much of that potential harm as we can without,
right?
Just like, we were joking about something, and like sometimes there are times when a business or organization is going to do what they're going to do, and either you are going to do it or your replacement is going to do it. And
right.
So this is we can just tell the business that, hey, this is maybe not the best idea, but if they're going to go do it, like either you or your replacement that's probably going to be doing it.
Yeah, and the problem I'm struggling with is the ways I would mitigate this problem are counter patterns to the whole value proposition of efficiency, right? Have humans review the code, have, throw security tools at the code, all that kind of stuff, and have those issues be fixed. And in theory, that's a good feedback loop that maybe can train your LLM or whatnot. But I think probably the right scalable solve is a market force pushing these coding tools to automatically include security, at least common security flaws, into what they build against, what they worry about.
Yeah, I think that's coming. I think that's starting to be pieced together, but it's not in any way pervasive right now. I think right now everybody's just trying to figure out how they can reduce their number of developers by 20, 30, 40, 50%.
Correct. That is exactly what they care about. And, that's the vision they've been sold. And in their own, I think the thing that I think scares me most, or I think what's happening, I shouldn't say scares me, but what I think why this is getting so misunderstood is executives and business leaders are off playing with these tools and they're seeing phenomenal returns and they don't know the weaknesses that are getting built into those.
Mm-hmm.
And that only is discovered by people very low on the food chain. And they're not the ones making the decisions, right? And we haven't had enough cycle yet for this to really bite a company that they've got to invest in a mitigation. Now, to be sure, there are plenty of companies popping up that are offering the Blinky Box mitigation tooling. I just don't think that they are high on anybody's list yet. And a lot of businesses are drunk on the concept of what they think AI can do for them. And I think there's going to be some rough hangovers coming.
Absolutely. There's an increasing amount of press about the likelihood that many of these AI investments never actually yield return. But and that certainly I think is being used as fodder by the AI naysayers. But I'll tell you, like how many ERP deployments, not ERM, how many ERP deployments end up working, right?
0.003%.
Like this is not a necessarily a uniquely AI problem. IT in general has a pervasive issue with showing value on large investments like this. So, but there's also, by the way, there's a couple other things. Like we know from firsthand experience what happens when some IT thing is in the financial press. Like when think about named vulnerabilities being picked up by CNBC. Like that's all they want to talk about. Well, go watch CNBC, and it's everything they talk about is AI right now. So it's not surprising that senior leadership at companies are fully invested in this. Like there was an interesting I think it was Yum Brands, right? The people who own KFC and Pizza Hut and Taco Bell, touting about how they're an AI company. like it's kind of off the hook crazy.
That does explain the meat in Taco Bell.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong, I love me some Taco Bell.
I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. But there's a game theory aspect here. If you are a CEO or CFO or COO, and you see this is all over the media, you know that your competitors, or you at least you believe your competitors, are fully embracing it and are going to leapfrog you if you don't also jump on it. And then if you have your IT or your security team telling you no, well, what's the response to that? Well, they're just living in the past.
And 100% agree with you. And there's this narrative out there that AI native tools are going to take the market share from traditional legacy tools, which is a whole bunch of buzzwords. But the concept is, if you didn't build your product from the ground up with AI, you can't compete. And I think there's a level of panic and fear at executive levels that is pushing them hard to embrace this world as an existential threat if they don't. And I don't know how true that is. It may be true. I don't know.
I think it's as true as how everything has to be cloud native, which is not incredibly true.
I mean, I think we're absolutely seeing the Gartner hype cycle play out here, right?
Yes.
We're at the peak of inflated expectations, and we're about to enter the trough of disillusionment, most likely. But that's a natural occurrence for most tools. So I interrupted another thought you were going to say. Sorry.
You know what? I guess what I was going to try to wrap up the thought on this and say, I think that there are going to be winners and losers, both at an organizational, but also at a personal level. And
even on this show right now, there are winners and losers. I'll let you decide amongst yourselves.
I think we all know who it is. One of us can talk in a straight line and the other one can't. So,
one of us is at the beach and the other one isn't.
That is also true. I think that we ignore this at our peril. I mean, we can look at it and see that it has lots of warts, it has lots of problems, it creates lots of problems. But I think that we have to be realistic in our expectations about how this movement is being viewed by senior leadership. And we can either embrace it and continue to have jobs in the future, or not, and not. Like, this is just where we're at. The problems that we have with AI today are temporary. And whether that's that it generates crappy code or it takes incredible amounts of energy, these problems are going to get solved. And they just are. And I'm sorry if you think that that's not the case, but they will. And we will move on from this. And so it's really going to be the people who embrace this and help their organizations through the forest who are going to be successful. And it's the ones who are resistant to it that are going to be left behind. So, and
I agree.
I don't know. I am concerned. Like I've helped many people get into this industry. And kind of like in the world of programming, I don't know that there's going to be as strong a need for as many security people in the future. There will be in the short term, like there's going to be a bubble, I think. But, because this is going to create new incident response jobs.
Right. And application security jobs, maybe.
Yeah, but over time, I think it's just like with software development, it's going to be the people who figure out how to best leverage AI and related technologies in the context of security that organizations are really going to be looking for in the future. So, put that into your personal plan and figure out what it means for you. My wisdom for the day. All right, the last story for today, and this is just a periodic reminder that this exists, that this is also from Security Week, and the title here is Inside the dark web's access economy, how hackers sell the keys to enterprise networks. I can't tell you how many times I have had discussions with people, and like even as of late, who really are not aware of how industrialized I'll call it hacking economy, just to use their terminology. This is not like what it once was. It's not a we know from news articles that there's 17, 18, 19-year-olds being arrested after hacking into some company from their basement, and that certainly is the case. But a lot of this is being industrialized, and we're seeing kind of like in more traditional industrial economies, we're seeing specialization happening. And so this article here is talking about what's called initial access brokers. And I think this is going to be rehashed for many people. And so if it is, I apologize, but I want to make sure that it's well understood that there is an economy for people who are very adept at the initial hacking or the initial intrusion of an organization, whether that's through phishing, whether it's through vulnerability exploitation, many different avenues that we've talked about over the years.
Perhaps bribery lately.
Bribery, that's right. Just giving them a new job too. We've seen and talked about it all. It feels like, but
indeed,
there is an economy. There's market for people who have established initial access into victim companies to sell that access to buyers who want to do whatever. Right? There's an economy here where there are buyers who want access into illegal access into organizations for the purpose of industrial espionage, for the purpose of ransomware deployment, for the purpose of whatever, even nation state, like there's spying that is happens through access purchased on these markets too. So the point is, like, there are people and organizations who have become exceptionally good at identifying targets, and they're going after targets of opportunity, right? They're not necessarily just focusing on the biggest and juiciest targets, because their market is just getting in and putting that access up for sale. And
so they troll around, find something vulnerable, get in, and then go market in a generic sense, without naming necessarily the company, on a form. Hey, somebody else, do you want access to a utility company in the Midwest that has X amount of employees that they just happen to stumble upon a way to get into?
So they talk a bit about in the article, because it seems intuitive that law enforcement or security researchers or whoever could get access to these marketplaces and just tell the victims, hey, like you have a problem. But as you just pointed out, it's quite often that you don't know, like when you're buying this access, you don't know who the victim is. You have as you said, you have an indication of what industry they're in, or maybe how large of a company they are, or what geographic location they're headquartered out of. But that's kind of it. And then they also have different methods of access that you can buy. So you can buy, like, they call them what they call them bundles, right? Where you can buy, you can buy just domain credentials, or you can buy VPN access, or you can buy VPN access plus domain credentials. And I'm sure it's not said in this article, but I'm sure also that you can buy like web shell access or reverse shell access or things like that. That the initial access broker has set up. And my guess is that, depending on the likelihood of that access, persisting, they probably have different pricing schedules. I also thought it was very interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Do you think like you get a punch card and like every 10th access is free?
Frequent shopper card, like a loyalty card?
Maybe. I don't know.
Good question. I don't know.
Look, they're businesses. They got to market. They got to
innovation.
I really should go into marketing for bad guys. That's what I should do.
That's right. So they talk about how there's a focus on the customers who are buying these initial access. They don't want to have to do anything more. Like they want they kind of want turnkey access. So they point out,
I have to your mom.
Oh, very nice. It's been a while. Welcome back.
We had a request.
Oh, the buyers of this access really want a turnkey solution. So they point out that selling access to a supplier of a target company doesn't actually buy a premium, even if that access might have kind of clear line of sight. They point out that like MSPs, managed services providers, don't demand a premium price, which
is surprising, but makes sense.
Yeah,
when you get that the attackers are lazy. I understand that.
Right. They want to be able to. I'm assuming, right? They want to be able to pay the money and then go and deploy the ransomware or whatever with the access that they just bought. They don't want to have to figure out how do I get from the MSP into these target organizations, even if like that could result in lots more customers, so to speak. They're looking for something that's much more turnkey. So
yeah,
it's
I would
fascinating. Counter
that, like if you have a very specific target, you might have a different mindset, right? But this is a more generic marketplace. But like if I knew I was going after Bob's Budget Bait Shop and I knew that they used Phil's Budget MSP and I had a really strong incentive to get into Bob's, I might go buy access to Phil's. But I think that's a very specific use case that doesn't drive up enough movement and demand to drive a market price, I guess is what they're saying here.
I infer, by the way, from the discussion in the article, that there's not a lot of targeted purchasing happening here on either side. Like it seems to me like the people who are buying the access are buying the access out of, like, they don't necessarily care who they're buying access to. They want the opportunity to deploy their ransomware, like almost regardless of who it is, or steal the data or whatever they're going to do. They don't care who it is. And so it seems like that has just evolved. The market economy for this has just evolved in that way. Like it's all targets of opportunity. And I'm going to guess that there's probably, not in this marketplace, but I'm going to guess that there's also probably more specialist markets for, like, I want to get into ABC company. You can probably find some kind of specialist marketplace to help with that. But that's not what this story is about. Anyway, I thought it was interesting, an interesting reminder that, like, this exists. This is a problem kind of like ransomware itself, this is not something that is targeted at a particular industry or type of organization. It is really just, targets of opportunity that people can make money off of selling access to. And if you end up in this list, if you end up, your access is going to get sold, and you're not going to get a heads up necessarily that that somebody's broken in and your access to your environment is being sold. So,
yeah. I mean, the only upside I can see is if you've got an initial access broker who gets in, there's probably going to be some lag time before somebody else buys that and then does something with it. So if you can pick up that initial intrusion, you might have a little window of opportunity to block them out before they start executing on whatever the next step is, maybe.
Now, I have seen, by the way, and this is something that I have had experience with, where someone had seen that an organization I worked with had access that was being sold. And if you want to talk about one of the most infuriating kinds of investigations, because there's no details. So just think about this. Somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, I just saw there is access to your environment being sold on the market. I can't tell you what system it is. I can't tell you when it happened. I can't tell you what username it's associated with. I can't tell you anything. All I can tell you is that access to your environment is being sold."
And your environment in this case is hundreds of thousands of hosts.
Yeah. But even if it isn't, it's think about that. That is a exercise in madness.
And hence all of your current mental illness.
And then you find out that it wasn't real.
And so now you're trying to prove a negative. This is why we drink.
Definitely why. And why I have no hair. So, anyway, that is the show for today. Patch your crap. Manage your IDs. Move to passkeys. Turn off the ability to downgrade. Tune your EDRs. Let's get out there, people. Make sure inventory is accurate.
Say hi to Jerry's mom.
Give your business people something that they can paste at the top of their Vibe coding, so that at least it doesn't have SQL injection vulnerabilities. Let's get on it, people. Anyway, thank you all. Thank you all for listening. If you want to read the stories we talked about on our show today, you can go to our website. It's defensivesecurity.org. Look for episode 318. I'll also drop a link to our Patreon page if you would like to sponsor us. We would definitely appreciate that. And in the meantime, if you would like to get in touch with us, where can they find you online?
You can reach me on two lovely social media platforms, one of which is yours at infosec.exchange, and the other is X, and I go by the same handle on both, Lerg, L-E-R-G. And someday I'll explain why, but not today.
Good. All right. And you can find me on infosec.exchange. It is at Jerry at infosec.exchange. And with that, we will talk again next week. Actually, by the way, I should say, next week will be a very special episode.
Maybe.
Well, it'll be very special. Either way.
Yeah. Don't know if we're going to post it.
Either way. Well, that's a good point. We will what I'm talking about is we will be hosting an event at Mission Security 25 in Atlanta. Our intention is to record it, and if it it works out, we will post it. If not, we won't. And
you'll never hear about this again.
We'll make some jokes. I'll go back and retroactively remove any references to it from all of our previous shows, and we'll pretend like it never happened.
No, we're honored. By the way, this is really our Patreon donors who get our shows a week early. We hear this, but by the time this drops for everybody else, it'll already have happened. We're honored to do it. We haven't done this very often, and so we don't know how well we're going to do live. So no ding on the venue or the event. It's more a ding on us of
yes.
Let's see how well we do with a live audience.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. I think it should be good. The audience should be fun. It's really going to be our ability to execute. So that's what's going to be exciting to see. All right, take care, everybody.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye.